Okay, so let's get this party started. I'll just start with the why we're doing this, and then what we're doing, and then we'll talk about the how to get started with this dashboard. So the real goal that we're trying to pull off with the Token Engineering Commons is a partnership with the Commons Stack, is to have the first ever bottom-up creation of an economy, where instead of what is normally the case, where you have a small group of people who really study the economics and understand the nitty-gritty of the system, they then just make the decisions of how the economic design should go. And I think that's really important. I don't think it's a bad move, but we're going to try something different. We're going to try to actually educate the community and let them debate the economic design as a collective. And this has never been done before, actually. Every economy that's ever existed has been designed and initialized from a core group of people. So we're trying to try this participatory economics. And it's not easy, and I'm going to just say we're in a very privileged position. We're starting the Token Engineering Commons. This is not the normal, like, oh, we're going to do a DAO to help save orphans. No, this is a Token Engineering Commons. So the people here are actually, very familiar with token engineering. So this is what makes it a great opportunity. And it's really fun, actually. Token engineering is a lot of fun. So we've been doing these parties every so often, and there'll be more parties next week to actually help people understand how this whole thing works. And to actually choose the parameters, we vote on it in this token log. And token log is probably the best place to start anyway, because the dashboard can be a little daunting, but the way that we're choosing these parameters is more iterative. The goal is really to start with someone else's parameters and then fork them. For instance, there is this someone submitted a crystal ball. Livia submitted this crystal ball parameter set. And then I forked it. Now it's crystal ball fork, right? And there's been many forks of Goldilocks. This is the original Goldilocks. It's a beautifully designed economy by Lauren, who works at Giveth. And what's nice about this one is she set it up so that the impact hour rates are all even numbers, right? So it's just nice and convenient. If we raise 800,000, then the impact hour rate is 25, 2 million, it's 50, 8 million at the cap, it's 100. And that just feels right? And this is the kind of fun we can have. So the why is, hey, let's see if we can try participatory economics. The how or the what is a little interesting. We're actually designing two different pieces, right? The first is the initial distribution. How do we distribute the tokens between the people who put money in to initialize the system and the people who put work in to initialize the system? And this is the hatch configuration. Now, there are other aspects around the token distribution that are not just the connection between the people who put money in, who we call backers, and the people who earned impact hours, and we call builders. There's also like how many tokens should one XDAI be worth, right? At 0.01, that means that we're only going to mint 24,000 tokens total. Each token will be worth maybe around $100. Maybe we want them to be worth $1,000 or $10,000 a token. Or maybe we want it to be worth, just a couple less than fractions of a penny and go the Doge route, right? And try to hit that Doge meme opportunity. This is up to us to decide. And this is kind of the hatch configuration is how do we design that initial token distribution event? And then we also have the DAO configuration. How do we as a DAO make decisions about moving forward? So the intention of the TEC Hatch DAO is to really make one big decision, and that is designing the more complicated economy with a bonding curve and conviction voting. But there may be other decisions that come up. What if the DAO wants to, instead of using XDAI, use some kind of currency that collects interest while it's sitting in the pot? Well, they would need to use this configuration to approve that choice. Or what if there's a technical issue that needs to be discovered? So there's a lot, of course, going on in both of these scenarios, but that's kind of the overall look, right? We got to figure out, how do we design the initial distribution, and how do we, as a DAO, actually approve proposals? And
Griff, would you say that this is sort of like a constitution framing process, right? There's lots of decisions to be made in the future, but that initial set of decisions is related to the decisions about how decisions are made in the future.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love that framing. This is like the constitution that we're creating, of the, how do we want to initialize? This is where all the founding fathers get together in a small room and, decide for the rest of the country how everything goes, except instead of it being the founding fathers in a small room, it's an open, transparent process that anyone can participate in. So that's the game, and it's pretty fun, actually. And all these different variables, they make it look, the dashboard looks a little daunting, but the real best strategy is to just kind of start at one of these proposals and kind of read through it. Understand what these charts mean with these small explanations, and then probably go through this table, which is the most interesting piece, where we talk about the actual value of impact hours and the relative total supply that goes to the people who earned impact hours, and then the rage quit, which has been a very political, controversial issue in this process, which is pretty fun because there are some people who are pro Hatch Tribute, and the pro Hatch Tribute people think that we should have a collective pot, a larger collective pot, so that the individuals are held accountable to the collective, and then and so they would be less likely to want to rage quit. And other people think that the pro rage quitters are actually more towards the point where, well, let's have the high rage quit percent so that the individuals can hold the collective accountable to their needs.
So comment I want to make too about the observation is that this observation is that actually providing enough detail that people don't agree is actually pretty helpful. So like in practice, if you kept things vague, then everyone would agree, and then later they'd fight about stuff or disagree in a way that they can't do anything about. But by creating these surfaces, these sort of governance surfaces that you can design over and debate, what ended up happening is people who sort of otherwise and largely agree in mission, vision, values sort of disagree on the best way to manifest those mission, vision, values. And this process allows the people who are really motivated to construct the sort of anchor configurations that represent how they think it should be, but also it allows people to do the forking and exploration of the space between those. And so you kind of see a almost evolutionary process over the proposals themselves as people debate and discuss and try to come to some agreement on how this is going to work, but without, again, starting from this place of pure binary choice, like here's two options constructed by some central parties, or without having this issue where you've kept things so vague that people don't disagree and the issues arise later in implementation. So there's a maybe painful at times, somewhat political process of debating and arguing, but actually making that possible and streamlining it is helping achieve sort of agreement and cohesion in the sort of medium to long term.
Yeah. And I was just looking at a proposal that has a 2% Hatch Tribute. Let's say I'm very pro Hatch Tribute. I can just click the link and make the Hatch Tribute 20 and resubmit. And now everyone gets to vote on which one of these two proposals, which do you like? Do you like the one with a Hatch Tribute of 20, where a bunch of the funds cannot be rage quit by individuals? Or do you like the one with a Hatch Tribute of 2? And the way that we like to fork here is it's really nice to give credit and say fork of this of the Hatch Tribute to 20%. That's it. And boom, you just submitted an economy. right? You just submitted a proposal for a new economy.
So how do you see people dealing with the risk of fragmentation? So when it's so easy to propose an alternative, it can result in a really long list of sort of maybe minorly differentiated proposals. And so, one of the attack vectors, if you will, is, taking proposals that are people like and forking them into a bunch of similar ones to sort of reduce the votes behind any one of them. So like kind of how do you see people dealing with doing or not doing that?
So the more forks, the better at the early stage. In this stage, on Thursday, we're going to end the initial signaling process of which proposals are the best. And the community stewards, who are the very active and very the group of people who have been around and understand the different dimensions of this project, are going to get together and trying to just manually aggregate. Oh, this was a fork of this and this and this. Okay, there's all of these forks that received this much voting. Okay, this is probably all one of these proposals should make the final 3 to 5 that we as a community vote on.
So it's a sort of clustering exercise. Since these are like now points in the design space, you can sort of bundle the points that are close to each other in the design space, and then I guess I'm not totally clear what the way of choosing it is, but you would choose one from the cluster to represent the cluster to make sure that the final voting decision isn't, overly affected by being distributed thinly across minor differences in forks.
Exactly. And we'll probably communicate with the different people, and like the top winning. So because we have token log and we'll have a number of votes for each individual proposal, the top of that cluster will communicate with them and just say, hey, do you actually prefer some of the iterations over the one that you put up there? And we'll just have conversations and do some sense making in the old fashioned, talking way, instead of just analyzing numbers and going to all that, because this is kind of an experiment and we're not exactly sure how the best way to do it is. So we're going to have a lot of manual involvement. But if everyone in that cluster who proposed these parameters is all like, yeah, that one that was proposed the day before the deadline is clearly the best. It just wasn't proposed soon enough. So it was a perfect aggregation of all of these. Oh, okay. So that's the one that should go for final vote.
So okay. Your group of stewards is serving as a sort of facilitator or administrator of rough consensus in order to kind of facilitate the process overall, but not necessarily looking to sort of steer or force any particular outcome. It's sort of the reverse. They're trying to help get the information out of the participants and into a form that they can vote on.
Yeah. What's really interesting here is that you're not just proposing parameters, you're proposing a strategy. Right? You're proposing a strategy for the DAO. So if you say, hey, min goal is actually going to be $8 million, we're going for big money. We're going for big money. And if we don't get big money, then it fails. That's a strategy, and you build around that strategy. If you say, hey, we're going for low cap, that's a strategy. And there should be these different, we're basically iterating on what are the best strategies. And then are the best exact forms of that strategy first, and then letting the community pick the final strategy that we run.
Well, the parameters aren't independent, right? This configuration space, if you will, has a lot of interdependence. So a parameter could be great at a certain value in a certain proposal, but that same parameter could be awful in a different proposal because it's not sort of co-fit with the other parameters. So you need this sort of process of distilling out both the strategy and then the specific configuration in order to make sure that you're not treating these parameters as independent, picking something where maybe if you vote on each individual line item, you get a kludge that doesn't work at all because it doesn't have a sort of coherence to it when it goes into a live system.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, if you have if you want to try to raise a lot of money, you should probably make the RageQuit percent very small, because the RageQuit percent is effectively a risk metric. So if you put Like with currently, if we hit in this setup, it says the RageQuit percent is 69%. So if I put in $100, I can, and I don't like how things are going, or I just need the money back because Dogecoin is down and I need to buy back in. So I'm going to take my $69 back out, and I have less risk, right? Than if it was $20 of a 20% is a RageQuit. And so reducing that risk will probably help raise more funds. But also, if you raise a lot of funds from people who are not engaged, maybe you need a lower quorum because the people with all the tokens may not be actively voting. There's a lot of second order effects. Is really nice for understanding the relationship to how much funds you put in and how much you can rage quit out and how many tokens are minted, and then equating that to someone's impact hours and just like being able to map that experience.
So another question I have for you, Griff, is you put a lot of effort into sort of building out these dashboards and trying to figure out how to frame the parameters and frame the metrics and make them sort of play withable, for lack of a better term. And I kind of wonder how you felt about people's engagement here, because I mean, at least from my perspective, the idea is to give people a better understanding of the consequences of their choices beyond the sort of narrative of the strategy, being able to give them at least a minimal demonstration where they say, here's what I think we should do and why, and here's what we would expect it to look like. It provides a little bit of, shared technical infrastructure for communicating and debating. But to what extent have people used that in practice? Like, do you see people engaging with and understanding the metrics? You've said several times that they're kind of scary in a sense, daunting, and I'm curious whether that's really just upon first seeing them, or once people start getting their hands on, does it actually seem like it resonates?
I think this whole concept of designing an economy for a lot of people is very new. For my experience has been with people who have have done this before, which is not very many people, but actually there's a decent chunk in our community. They start to understand the second order effects very quickly. For other people, the people who haven't really had to do this before and had an experience of it going well or not, they see each parameter as an individual choice and don't necessarily connect it together so much if they're doing it on their own. And that's why we're doing a lot of these parties and talking about the second order effects and helping people see one or two connections of this web of parameters, and feeling how when you bring one parameter, it kind of vibrates through the rest. And once they start to see one or two and have been to a party, maybe two, they start making some really interesting decisions. And they start having strong political opinions, which is that's what's been really cool for me, is seeing how in these participatory systems, it's not just in our normal government where you get these politics, it's any kind of collective decision making, even around something as relatively dry as parameters, right?
And to be honest with you, to harken back to a comment Trent made at the very beginning, I think this is a evolutionary, the dynamical system. These are the parameters of a dynamical system, and that the resulting thing has this sort of evolutionary property to it. So, for lack of a better terms, people are just coming to grips with those things and how the maybe decisions about parameters differ from the outcomes that evolve in the future. And I personally think that this experiment is really interesting because we really don't know how people will kind of engage with that, and we don't know how it's going to play out. So, we have to do it and see. I don't know. I'm curious what Trent thinks so far.
I was on mute. Hi. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. Where it is, it's a dynamical system that has emergent properties, right? And, people who have designed evolutionary algorithms have done in the past, but others too, right? Like E.O. Wilson, after he started, work on ants, he started to go into higher and higher levels of basically coming up with differential equations to describe the behavior of ant colonies and other ecosystems, right? That was sort of the second half of his career. I think it was called sociobiology or something, right? And he actually wasn't very good at math, so he brought in some mathematician friends to help him out. So there's a long history of this too, like Jay Forrester, like Zargham has pointed me to, and others too. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of this view, and like Griff, you've been pointing out, you mentioned a few times, it is fun, right? And I think it's cool that you've lowered the barrier to entry to help other people to design these systems, right? And it's also similar, like I know in my experience, designing evolutionary algorithms, it's really fun to play with them, right? To wiggle the parameters and run them again, and wiggle the parameters, run them again. So I think it's, taking this, and it's something that is slightly unfamiliar, right? Like it's new territory for people. So everything so far, I like the trajectory. So and I like the framing.
It's a little bit like Sim City, but you get to step into the city afterwards.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me a bit of, you can even go more extreme, like what I'm trying, Cometh, right? Which is basically an AMM wrapped by a video game. And I love it, right? Because it looks like a video game, but you're actually doing AMM trading. And this version here, right, doesn't look like a video game yet, but it already gives you a bit of that feel and that insight, right? And imagine 2 years from now someone does something like Cometh did, but for this too as well, right? And it can come there, and maybe it will look like SimCity. Who knows? So
This is Zeptimus's proposal that I'm looking at here. I don't know, Zep, if you had any if you wanted to walk through your strategy here, or and how you feel about it.
Yeah, actually, that's like my version 2 of the strategy, and I really wanted to have like make the basis of the bonding curve like very trusted. That's why I added a very little CSTK ratio, and yeah, and yeah, at the same time we have to raise less money because of that. And yeah, can you go up?
Right here, to the strategy.
No, to the numbers.
Oh yeah.
Like yeah, even up. Like it's
So
oh yeah. But yeah, at the same time, after going many parties, I was started to feeling like these parameters, like I still learning, right? And maybe when I was building these parameters, I was, for example, right now I feel like I would increase a bit like the CSTK ratio, because like as you can see on this graph, like the builders are getting like there is no alliance for raising more money, and when both objectives are aligned, like with the bakers and the builders, that's the best scenario for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Because the backers don't have much of an incentive to put more money in.
Exactly, and I think yeah, I've been learning this, and yeah, I will propose like again, because yeah, I still playing with them, and then for the DAO strategy, I don't see like the numbers now, but I was yeah I was like what Griff was mentioning before. I really wanted a high support requirement, like 60, because like I want like the community agrees, and at least the active members agrees, so there is not that much RageQuit. But then at the same time I add a low quorum, because if we have some technical issues, then people who is the people who is fast can fix these issues. And yeah, those are my parameters.
Yeah, they're pretty nice.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I still have to trick them a bit. No, maybe wait like until after this call. I will make them again, and then you fork those because they are going to be better. Thanks, Griff.
Okay. Yeah, and the cool thing here is that for token log, if Zepti's like, okay, these are good parameters, but actually I don't want them to be proposed. I really want these new parameters to be proposed. We can close the issue, and everyone who voted on it will get their votes back, and they can vote for the new one. And the interesting thing here is that just kind of because of the tool we're using, we don't really have a clear proposal round and voting round for this first stage. So you can propose and vote at the same time. And but culturally, we're trying to push to have all of the proposals in by Tuesday, so that and we're also telling people, hey, like make sure to hold back some votes for Wednesday, and just use the soft governance of like common knowledge and culture to talk about the strategy.
Are you able to reallocate the ones that you submitted if you choose to, or only if the issue is closed?
Only if the issue is closed.
Gotcha. So it's going to be important to have that like kind of closing exercise so that people can reallocate. And I mean, I think it's an open question how to do this clustering and consolidation. We discussed it a few months ago, but like ultimately the final vote needs to be over a small enough number of things that people can realistically evaluate them, and which are different enough from one another that we don't have this, issue we discussed earlier. But, I think one of the interesting parts of a governance process that's often overlooked is the sort of deciding what's on the ballot in the first place. And so there's a little bit of exploration here with this, what I'll call explore and exploit algorithm or social algorithm in the everyone's just like, forking and voting and kind of we're starting to see some things bubble out and some specific lines between groups emerge. Then we have to do this consolidation in order to have a like sort of healthy sort of voting decision process afterwards.
Yeah, no, totally. I think, as the TEC in some ways is acting like a guinea pig here for this process. And the Common Stack we have a case study that's being written about this so that we can maximize the learnings from this process, and other organizations can fork it and apply it how they like, because we're going to do a great job. I really do think that so far it's been working really well. And we battle tested this strategy with the mission, vision, values. And now this is the next test. And then we'll have one more iteration where the people who actually participate in the hatch, they get hatch tokens. And with those tokens, they will be able to design the bonding curve, conviction voting, disputable voting, Celeste, and the vesting period for the tokens. They'll have, that will be a very complicated thing. And, the dashboard that we have right now is not, I would say it's, its UX could be greatly improved. We learned a lot doing the Common Simulator as far as like trying to make easy UX. And then this is like the first prototype of a dashboard like this. But we are going to definitely come back and totally redo this starting from scratch, but with all the learnings for other communities to play with. And we'll also take all the learnings from here and make it work for designing the bonding curve.
This is your, rough MVP. You get encounter with the users and get feedback and learn how to iterate it to be more useful. I do think a really interesting observation about all of this is that it does have like these game vibes, but it's like not a single player game, right? It's a multiplayer game, and that multiplayer game has a sort of path of mastery, and you're starting to lay out that path and giving the community the opportunity to level up through these, different interactions, these different decisions, to learn from their decisions. And, and in a sense, I kind of envision that same future Trent was talking about earlier, where eventually, the user experience or the community user experience starts to feel like, a game, but it's not a game in the sense that they don't care about the outcomes. It's a game in the sense that they feel as though they can interact with it and understand what's going on. And, in particular, I would say economy is a multiplayer game, like political economy is a multiplayer game. And we have to build the tools that allow people to play it cooperatively, even when they don't agree on everything.
Yeah, I want to add, I think you just really hit the nail on the head there. Like, having gone through this experience myself, you know, you really are challenged to articulate well your strategy, both for, you know, the hatch strategy and then the DAO strategy. And you know, everything is available for you to make a good, educated decision on these parameters. And, you know, sort of looking at the hatch, you know, what should the hatch tribute be and why? And, you know, you find yourself spending days thinking about these things, right? Like designing the hatch strategy and designing the DAO. So you start thinking about like membership ratios and what is the advantages of having a low barrier and versus the advantages of having a high barrier. So it's sort of something that you find yourself, because you're playing this game, it like in your real world, you find yourself mulling over these decisions constantly. So it really makes it super accessible to people to be able to understand and continue to think about.
Actually, Tam, I'm curious how the path to that point was for you, because I feel like some of us were like really deep in math and simulations beforehand, and that you came from a different background. And so, you know, like, was it accessible? Like, what did it take to get to the point where it felt the way that you just described?
Yeah, so even though I'm like really deep in the TEC, I didn't understand all the parameters, right? First thing that we did was we've sort of pulled them out of the code and put them on the forum and described them in words. And you're sort of just like, you read one and then you try to make sense with another one and it doesn't really come together. And then as this dashboard was coming together, I still didn't really use it very often until sort of maybe a week and a half ago. And it was like the thing that really brought everything together was the conversations in the Params parties. And it was really, you know, I did one with Griff and then I did one with Zeptimus, where Zeptimus led the last one that I was in. And it was just having conversations with everyone who's participating in that hatch party, with the Params party, to sort of share your opinion, to share different points of view, to sort of talk through, you know, what is a realistic quorum? You know, what do you expect from voting in other voting environments, you know, in real life voting environments? And is a 10% quorum high, actually, considering other places that people have voted? I feel like the dashboard was super helpful. And Trent said this earlier, because you tweak something and then you run the simulation and then you look at the numbers and then you know, to get to understand something, you might swing it very high or swing it very low just to sort of see the bounds that you're playing with, and then sort of refine till you get exactly what you're looking for. So I mean, I don't think I could have set, I don't think not having this dashboard, it would have been possible to propose parameters for, you know, a regular person.
Quick question. This is for anyone, but probably Zargham more than anyone. Has anyone written down the specific objectives and constraints for the design of the token engineering commons and then run an optimization of the parameters towards the objectives and constraints?
So I have not done that. Actually, interestingly, this is a ongoing conversation with Griff and I about whether I'm going to propose anything. And I've been sort of actively not doing that because I'm afraid of having like undue influence. And in fact, I think one of the challenges, as you well know, Trent, is that if I propose a set of objectives and constraints and solve an optimization problem over this parameter space, that will be sort of deterministic in the definition of the objectives and the constraints. And what I think is so interesting about this process is that, at least for this one, I'm not exactly sure what those objectives and those constraints should be, because they're in a way being manifest or revealed by the preferences exposed by the community. So maybe in the future, after we've run experiments like this, if we could, work backwards and uncover our best estimates about the objectives and the constraints that the community cares about, or like, in a sense, parameterize those, then you could imagine going up one level and saying, all right, cool, now just let's agree on the parameters of the objectives and the constraints, and then let it, like an AI algorithm, give us really well-defined governance surface. A set of variables under the control of the community, and insofar as we're interested in using even more advanced computational methods, what you would do there is make that the decision variable of an optimization problem. But then still the optimization objective and constraints are effectively governance questions, because it's what does the community want this system to achieve?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And implicit in my question was an asking of where we are at in the sort of stages. And we are still at the level of simulation, not parameter sweeping in a more sophisticated way versus optimization in a fully sophisticated way. And that's fine, right? I expect it'll probably be yours. And I think it makes lots of sense, because this is having it where it's just simulation is much more approachable to the community right now as well. And being able to play just like some people have been talking here, of course. So this makes complete sense.
And the point is well taken, Trent, because in environments where the requirements are coming from like much more centralized teams, in the sense that someone is defining the requirements, we do exactly the kind of thing that you're describing. But in this setting, we don't actually know the requirements, because we're helping the community learn what they want them to be.
Yeah. And I mean, also, once you have optimization, you might end up, optimizing for the things you've written down, but it might end up failing in other things, because some of the parameters actually have their own constraints, et cetera, and basically, you end up, ending up in a completely infeasible space. Just you don't know it's infeasible because you haven't specified that. So it makes more sense to make it, more manual iterations, looking at this stuff, et cetera. Anyway, I don't want to distract too much in that part. It's very good to understand. And also, I'm not saying we should go to optimization anytime soon, right? The analog circuit community, I started out doing work there, building optimizers, but even 15 years later, very few of them were building optimizers, and I had switched from building optimizers to building tools to help people visualize the results of the simulation better, verify the design better, do parameter sweeps better, et cetera. Because it's the designers are iterating as they go to try to figure out what it is that they want. And my feel is that governance, the set of objectives and constraints for governance, are even more ambiguous than for analog circuits.
Exactly. And I think that's the key piece here, is that the social, these are socioeconomic systems. So like figuring out a very clear objective set of requirements is very difficult. And I think it can be done probably post initialization for a very small scope, right? Like if you're saying, oh, hey, there's this problem, we're running out of money in this funding pool, how do we optimize for that one piece? Like that's a lot easier than right now we're trying to optimize for the results of our vision and mission and values. And how do we connect the economy to what is going to enable the creation of ethical, safe, resilient, and diverse economic systems to benefit societies around the world? Like it's a very,
I was going to say, to make an attempt at clarifying the objectives, at least, say less formally, but more narratively, there's this notion of governance as adaptive capacity that I'm like furthering. And I think what's happening here is we're describing a set of structures where we have the balance struck between the capacity for it to stay the same, so that it has some persistence or inertia, with its capacity to change. So, in a sense, there's a natural trade-off in timescales there, where with enough energy, we want to be able to change it. It has adaptive capacity. But on the other hand, we need to have enough resistance to change that it's not just like jerked all over the place. And so, although we might be able to articulate that in very formal terms in something like analog circuits, in this case of a socioeconomic system, we're still trying to figure out what that means to have this like frequency domain decomposition that makes sense.
I can give a comment. So, a lot of the RageQuit terminology came from Moloch v1. Moloch v2 is used directly in Metacartel Ventures, which I'm a member of. And, anyone can quit at any time, but it's actually pretty rare for people to be quitting once they get involved in the community, partly because there's the broader social element. And in general, like if you become a bad actor within that MCV community, then it's like it really affects your broader career chances and stuff, right? So there was the filtering of people coming into Metacartel Ventures. people can leave on good terms and stuff too or whatever, but overall, people aren't thinking, okay, I'm just gonna, like, we haven't seen anyone, as far as I know, just leave because they're sort of cashing out and they're like, screw you all or whatever, right? And that never ever happened. And I don't see it because there's, just enough of a social fabric within that DAO to be like that. And I can see that Token Engineering Commons, there's, like a bit of a vetting to become part of the token engineering community, in the sense where over time to build reputation and so on. And there is sort of a desire for social cohesion. So RageQuit is more of a tool, knowing that you can exit really helps, right? Because it's optionality, and that's very important for anything like democracy, whatever, right? If you can't exit, then it's fine. In terms of how it's framed, I haven't thought about that too much, like framed of sort of, as a RageQuit or the other way you mentioned. But RageQuit, I mean, it naturally has a slightly more negative sounding way of thinking about it. That's just because the Moloch roots and Amin and stuff. But overall, I think at least my interpretation isn't so negative. It's just like it's an exit optionality that often isn't exercised because of the social constraints of the community.
Yeah, I kind of want to tag onto that. So, I think the most important observation there is that the value created in these is not limited to the financial value. This is if you think of it in this sort of sense of a political economy, there's a lot of value encapsulated in the relations, in the coordination, in the sort of impact on your relationships with the other people involved. And so as a result, you don't necessarily need to frame it in terms of purely, okay, well, how much money am I able to take out? And kind of along these lines, I think an important point of reference is the work by Hirschman on exit, loyalty, and voice, which is a sort of like around the concepts around, what that, let's just say, the power to exit gives you. And I think this is one of those places where things are really counterintuitive. The ability to exit means that you have that optionality sort of empowers you in the community, because like you can leave, people know you can leave. If you disagree enough, maybe you will leave or maybe someone else will, but there's a counterintuitive second order effect related to the optionality to leave. You'd think, oh no, people can leave, so they'll leave. But in reality, people can leave sort of so they stay because they're not worried about it, right? They know that they can leave if they really want to, which makes them feel almost more empowered, and thus actually can lead to people contributing and participating more. And I think with that in mind, the main reason, at least in my book, to keep the RageQuit terminology is simply as a nod or a tribute or attribution to Moloch, where the idea was sort of really put forth, socialized, and tested. And so, sort of in the vein of having norms around attributing people to people's contributions, the main reason isn't to say, hey, this is negative. It's actually to nod to the sort of research and organizations that sort of pioneered some of those ideas, at least in the crypto.
Sure. The reason I bring this up primarily, I was looking at the distributions when I was doing my Hatch params. I looked at the distribution of impact hours, which Griff is scrolling past right now, and I noticed that they're quite skewed. So there are some people that got a lot. There are a lot of people that got in the middle, and then there's a really long tail of small contributors. So what I'm curious is, in this Hatch configuration, how much of the tech tokens minted are going to builders versus backers? Because I'm curious how much of that is going to go to a potentially skewed distribution of impact hours holders. So that's kind of the chart that I'm looking for, that I'm missing in the dashboard. But maybe it's there partly through these RageQuit diagrams. This is where I'm still trying to
really
grasp it myself.
This total supply held by builders at the different amounts. That's where you see so this is TAM's proposal, which has a very nice distribution, a very strong distribution, where at the minimum, if we raise 400K, then 50%, over 50% of the minted tokens will go to the people who earned impact hours. And of course, you can see exactly that distribution here, like how many tokens go to each person. If you change, in fact, you can even change the target goal and impact hour rate at target goal, and get an exact tech token minting for that rate. You just have to go to this chart and see, like, oh, the impact hour rate at, let's say 3 million is, well, let's say 2.5 million, because I actually already did this. I was just changing it to see what the impact hour, if the impact hour rate's 125 at 2.5 million, then what do people get minted? Like how much Zeptimus is the top minting rate. You know, he's the top one to get things, and he gets 89,000 tokens. Okay, cool. That's sweet. If we raise 2.5 million, but also you can see the total supply is 32% go to builders. And if we raise 15 million, then 10.5% go to the builders.
So would it make sense in a future iteration, to kind of Jeff's point, to have a normalized area chart that was essentially x-axis equal to amount raised and y-axis equal to percent going to builders versus percent going to backers, and even possibly, as you've done, kind of the fraction of that that's rage quittable? Though I'll be honest, to Jeff's point, I'm not sure. I guess there's some interesting dynamics in play when we talk about rage quittable, because, you know, the whole system will revert to a different state. So there's a trajectory associated with all the backers rage quit at, you know, day one, and there's a sort of new starting point that would imply. And actually, I think one of the interesting things about this design is that in that scenario, there's still a non-trivial amount of funds left over for the builders to steer, to iterate on the products, on the whatever that is under their disposal. And, you know, I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing to explore, but, you know, I definitely think it's an interesting edge case scenario. And you're kind of, I don't know, like poking at the edge of it when you include things like backers can rage quit, but it's not really that fleshed out, because it's really an extreme failure mode scenario. You're, in a sense, you're testing for the worst case, where the worst case is what would happen if the thing went live and then everyone who could leave did. And obviously we don't expect that to happen. I'm generally a big proponent of testing boundary conditions, but I'm not sure if it's clear that that's like an extreme boundary condition, not something we would expect to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also want to add that as far as the impact hours, like it's kind of weird. Like, for instance, Sem is pretty high here, but that's because he stopped being paid. And so when people don't get paid, they get more impact hours. People who are actually collecting an income, because there's less risk, they don't get as much reward from impact hours. Like, I get paid by the common stack, and even though I spend like just all of my life on this, I only have 139 impact hours. But Zeptimus has been spending all of his life on this, and he has 7 times as much as me, because you know, he goes.
Impact hours are volunteer hours, basically. They're not raw hours of contribution. They're, you know, either above and beyond what your job is that you're, you know, if you're paid for, or they're, I'm gonna guess, if you don't have a job and you're doing stuff, then it's all above and beyond. And I think that's also a thing that, you know, may merit clear description for people who are coming in and looking at these for the first time and maybe don't totally understand how these things are accrued. But they can be thought of as volunteer hours as opposed to just raw hours.
Yeah, and there's a nice forum post that explains in the nitty gritty detail how impact hours are calculated, and we post them every 2 weeks. But it is one of these things where you know, it's hard. It's really hard, because only so many people are going to even focus on this, you know, and look at the results of praise and impact hours. There it is. So this forum post explains the process, and so there's different examples, and like here's me and Zep and Juan, and so different people have different individual could say payment, I don't want to say contracts, but like different situations. And with actually there was a Moritz who works with Holochain, came to one of our calls once, and and made a statement that was really impactful. That was like, listen, everyone has a unique economic situation, and they need a unique economic deal for maximum satisfaction. So in this case, I get paid full time by the Common Stack. It's not a lot, 19 DAI an hour, but it's still full-time pay, just like Tam and Jeff. And so I get 85% of my impact hours that I earn through quantification get taken away because I have reduced risk. And here because it's also a job. Juan Carlos was getting partially paid, but not full-time, and he was putting in full-time hours, so he get 50% of his impact hours back. And Septimus isn't paid at all, and he's also basically doing full-time, recording every call, coming to every meeting, being a steward and leading the transparency group. So he gets 100% of impact hours. And we have this open quantification sheet, but it's a lot of data and it's complicated. And so it's one of these things that like it's accountable because it's happening in the transparent way on Discord. We quantify things and different people show up. We just did it yesterday actually, and you can see like who has how many impact hours at any time, but who's going to dig into this stuff, right? It's a challenging situation. All these things are challenging. I will say that normally there's just a core team that gets 10% of the raise and that's it, right? Like, and they don't have this different, ratio between like, okay, if we raise more, we get a lower percent, but it has a higher value and this like alignment of incentives. And the team is usually maybe 10, max 30 people. And now our team is 386 people. And of course, there's the long tail of people who just get a very small amount. Probably about half get less than 4, it looks like, or less than 5. And then we have the whales like Septimus.
It's interesting though, right? Because at least in some level, it's commensurate with reality. I mean, it's tricky. A thing about power law distributions is that they're pretty natural, and sometimes they might seem problematic if you have too much voting power associated with them. But, one of the things that's important to remember is that this is a measurement, and therefore it is, to the best of its ability, meant to represent the real contributions. And then how we convert those measurements into decisions is another point where our policy choices affect sort of representation. So things like conviction voting, things like quadratic voting create different ways of funneling the measurements that represent people's ability to participate into decisions. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so interesting to think about this in what I would consider an electrical engineer's mindset, where signal processing is the given analogy for voting, where you say, look, like there's this base level information or even capacity to provide information. You could think of it as gains on your inputs. Each individual in the community has their own input signal to provide. Some measurement of their impact hours or their sort of TEC tokens post-launch is effectively the gain parameter on the input of their opinion. But then there's a lot of downstream signal processing that's very context dependent that's meant to effectively synthesize that into decisions. And depending on what kind of decision you're making, you might want very different like structures for that. And, obviously we've done a lot of work with conviction voting to make it effective for certain kinds of funding decisions, tested it out quite a lot with OneHive. But it's also keep in mind that, there's a lot of research going on in different ways to do this. And, at least for me, the framing of this as signal processing, as sort of this sensor fusion where each individual person is a sensor and these weights are gains, but we still ultimately need one sort of community level decision, actually makes a really powerful analogy and helps us explore not just what the right algorithm is, but actually what's the right algorithm for the right kind of decision. Like, what is the way in which we synthesize this? And actually, to Trent's question earlier, the answer largely depends on what your objectives and constraints are. And so there's still a lot to be learned, but at least, again, my take on this is the token engineering community is in a sort of privileged position to explore these algorithmic policies for policies that result in good signal processing, which result in coordinated decision making that they feel is representative of them, even when they don't individually agree on everything.
Yeah, I would love to talk second order effects of different parameters. This for instance in TAMS, having a relatively low impact hour rate at infinity, 200 isn't not super low, but it's pretty low, really creates this strong incentive alignment. Where is that chart? Here it is, where like at 400K, the total supply held by a builder is 50%, and at 15 mil, it's 10%, right? And the RageQuit percent goes up a lot as well. It's 83% at 15 mil, and it's 60% at 2.5, and 45% at the min. And I'm curious what you think, Z, about like how that will affect how we can make decisions around the DAO configuration or around other factors.
I mean, to be honest with you, my feeling, and apologies for the crying baby, my feeling is that the actual percent of impact hours to relative to the percent from backers is a little bit tricky to interpret, because a lot of the backers also have impact hours. Like, you would expect there to be a lot of overlap. And so in order to really understand, you kind of need to, look at the way that manifests. So I'll take Zeptimus as an example, since he's here to talk about it. Like, by not taking like a salary and a job and contributing lots of time, he has, say, a lot more impact hours. If he's also, so well off that he also does a large amount of backing, then he might be really, really whaley. On the other hand, if the result of that is, I did a lot of impact hours, but therefore I have less funds, therefore I sort of am heavy on impact hours and low on backer status, then then that might actually counterbalance a little bit. And we don't really know what those distributions are going to look like, but I'm kind of imagining that there's some latent joint probability distribution between, contributors as impact hours and contributors as backers. And the experiment itself will be one of the first times we get really good data on that. So we'll be able to say things like, okay, well, it turns out that there's, let's say a couple groups. There's the, high impact hour, high backer. There's the, low impact hour, high backer. There's the high impact hour, low backer, and there's the low. And if you look at that even just 2x2 grid, we might say, okay, well, how much density is in each of these? And I might want to know how this works out across those 4 groups, maybe not so much just against these 2 groups, because it's hard to treat them as independent groups when we know full well that many of us are going to be both in various degrees. And so, it's really that KDE, density map across those 2 dimensions that's going to give us a lot of information. And although it's helpful to have the dashboards and stuff to see it from a partitioned basis, like here's how much weight goes for backing, which is money, versus impact hours, which is labor, or unpaid volunteer labor, I do think it's a little bit of a simplification, and the result of that is the real dynamics emerge from some of these cross terms. And another important point about this, though, is that in practice, there's going to be ranges of attention that people can pay. And so, like, if you think of economy as bounded by attention, sort of Herb Simon's sort of attention economy stuff, like the bottleneck is attention, then you realize that it's probably okay to have this distribution, especially if the attention paid is, reasonably proportional to these results. So I would argue that people who participated in the impact hour side are likely to be higher in the I'm willing to spend my attention on this. So if with that in mind, there tends to be a bias towards more weight on the impact hours. But like conversely, that's sunk cost, right? You've already put it in. So when this thing goes live, you want to attract other people, then you might sort of say, well, it's a positive sum game. We put all this work in, but it really only works out if these backers come in. And, hopefully the backers also become contributors and active attention providers. So, I'm, again, kind of going back to my point earlier, I don't know the answer, and I'm really curious how this process is going to help our community express or reveal their preferences in this dynamic. Since we know that we don't know exactly how it's going to work, all we can do is sort of discuss and explore and kind of analyze after the fact and let that inform future decisions.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that's like, in the present decision, when you're looking at this dashboard and you're looking at the total supply held by builders, if you make the impact hour rate at infinity high, then you can kind of see that like the amount of tech tokens that are held relative to builders and backers doesn't change that much. Whereas if this goes low, it changes a lot. You have a kind of a more varied, distribution between backers and builders. And so it creates a lot of interesting like variables, right, that you can't control for, because now the results are going to change based off of how much we raise, and we don't know how much we're going to raise.
Well, and this goes back to the discussion earlier about the constellations of parameters, because what you're basically telling me is that one parameter actually affects the sensitivity of the system to another parameter, right? They're not separate. Changing one doesn't necessarily change the other, but it changes how sensitive the other one is. And so if in one regime, the parameter is not very sensitive and you're messing with it, nothing's happening really, you're like, whatever. But then you go over and you change something else, you go back and start playing with that other slider again, and suddenly it has a lot of effect. And that's part of the reason you need tools like this, because it's pretty hard for people to get their head around that without a little bit of, like SimCity tooling.
Yeah, and I want to say you picked a great example, because specifically the reason that it's so skewed in this one, the one that I submitted, is because the minimum raise and the target raise are quite low, like what I'm calling, certain. And then the max raise is like pie in the sky. So the max raise is so far beyond what I think is possible. And that's why the results are disproportional when you look at the pie charts for the min, the target, and the max.
But if you were optimizing in the kind of the way that Trent described, you would have a prior estimate distribution of funds raised. So you'd have this like maybe exponential, switch a single parameter family distribution estimate of amount raised, which has this, dying tail. And what would happen then is your expectation of what would happen would, be weighted in that lower area. So you have your minimum raise, and then you have your sort of target raise, and then you have this max way out. And so what you're really doing is drawing something that is sort of tuned for these modest expectations. It makes room for, like, allows for an extreme unexpected event, but honestly, you would be picking things based on, yeah, okay, well, that's a rare outcome. And, if that positive rare outcome occurs, then this other characteristics happen, but most of the sensitivity lives in the mass of the expected outcome distribution. And the sensitivity goes down a lot as you get out the tail.
And the one thing that's cool with the max and min is that you can control for your configuration space, right? This was kind of what happened with Fay Protocol, where it's like, well, we don't expect to raise $1 billion. Of course not. but it was within their configuration space. So even though 15 million might be above what you expect, it's bull market. People made a lot of money off Dogecoin, and who knows what could happen, right? Or maybe Dogecoin tanks and people lose money and they don't have it. So then we only end up raising 400K. And
yeah, I mean, this goes to the different, we talked a little bit earlier about testing extreme cases. You know, you have this one notion of the expected, which is we just talked about, but like the configuration space has sort of by definition boundaries or like extreme points. And so if you look at what would happen under extreme points, you can avoid some of the challenges that arise with something like phi, where basically, yeah, okay, something that maybe wasn't expected happened. The trajectory of inputs was outside of their expectations, but like it was still possible to model and project what would happen under that scenario, right? That was not the expected scenario, but it was a possible scenario and arguably even an extreme case of a possible scenario. So when we talk about the extreme cases, they can be on, you know, various dimensions of extreme. And in our case, we talk about, okay, well, what's the extreme case? You know, we fail to hit the minimum raise. Cool, basically nothing happens, it reverts. We just barely passed the minimum raise and like we're right at the boundary. That gives you a certain outcome. You know, we hit the maximum and we have a scenario where we hit the max and more people want in and they can't even get in because you've hit the cap. Like, what does that look like? There's another scenario where, you know, either of those cases plus immediately after everyone who can rage quits. And where does that put you? And in each one of these circumstances, we're not saying that any of these things are likely, but you're characterizing how the system would behave in each of those extreme points to try to like, I don't know, like secure things, make them safer, give clear expectations. Like in the most extreme case where described by this happens, we would see a dynamic like this. So people aren't necessarily surprised. And, you know, another maybe non-obvious aspect of this, since we're making the analogy to something like Faye, is when something's sufficiently complex, it's really dangerous to have uninformed participants. So, you know, one of the aspects of the token engineering commons that has been held pretty fast is that it is participatory, but it is gated. And it's a little bit weird to say both of those because it's like an invitation to everyone, and the screening is more like, do I feel safe letting you participate in this? Or, you know, not, I don't mean I in the sense that any one person is doing it, but more in the sense that the norms are like, look, like there's some experimentation going on here. You need to be able to participate, understand what you're doing, and you're not just aping into this thing. And I know that's maybe a little bit counter to what you see in a lot of crypto systems right now. Like some of the biggest successes are the ones that have had massive amounts of people ape into them and participating in them. But, you know, here, because of the sophistication of the experimentation, there's a sort of expectation that people who are going to participate are also going to spend the time and the attention to understand what they're getting involved in and to participate in it. And so, you know, in a sense, those extreme point experiments help flesh that out for people. They say, look, like it could be great and look like this. It could be bad and look like that. It could be great and end up being bad by accident. You know, something like Faye fits that category. Like it was, you know, in almost like failure by success, right? Yeah. Because the success was so extreme that the bridge wasn't rated to hold that much weight. And you're like, oh crap, like we can't have that many trucks driving on this bridge per day. Like, even though it's an awesome bridge, it really wasn't intended to bear that weight. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that we don't totally understand yet in crypto economics, and that groups like the Token Engineering Commons is looking to explore and improve. And so it's very much a dog fooding exercise in like, what's our decision surface, our governance surface? How do we go about evaluating it? And how do we come to consensus together about what point in this configuration space we want to be in?
I have a couple more concrete questions about the dashboard as well. Tollgate fee. I saw on Lauren's 5K. Is that like are we expecting people to pay like $5,000 to issue a vote?
The Tollgate fee has an interesting situation in Moloch DAOs because there's also this vote proposal buffer. So there's an edge case where if you vote yes on one proposal, that means you cannot rage quit until that proposal is executed. So if then a really bad proposal comes up right after that proposal, like maybe there's a 2-minute window between the two, and you voted yes on the first proposal before you saw the really bad proposal that you wanted to rage quit with, you would have 2 minutes to rage quit between proposals. And so that creates an issue, right? That creates it's an edge case, but to prevent that edge case, there's this vote proposal buffer that says if someone makes a proposal, another proposal cannot be initiated for this amount of time. And now that creates another side effect, which another edge case scenario, which is less edge case, honestly, that's a griefing attack, where if you want to just block the DAO from making decisions, you can just make a bunch of proposals, right? And then that buffer hour, that period of time between the proposals slows the DAO down. And so the solution to that is a Tollgate fee. So basically, to create a proposal, there's a fee, and you don't get this fee back. It's not a deposit. It's a gift to the DAO. It's saying, hey, I want this to happen, and I'm willing to put down $5,000 to make this happen, right? Now, of course, and I say it in this thing here too, if I could also make a proposal in this scenario, like let's say I make one proposal, hey, let's upgrade to the commons upgrade, and then maybe that proposal fails and it doesn't go through because of a bug, right? I make another proposal that says, hey, give me $10,000, $5,000 to cover this fee for making this proposal, and $5,000 to cover the failed proposal because like there was a bug and it's okay, right, DAO? So you guys can give me the money back, right? And if the DAO is trusted and friendly, they will pay back the Tollgate fee. But if someone else wants to make a proposal like, hey, go buy Dogecoin, Elon to the moon, right? Then, in fact, the first proposal to the DAO was, do you believe in God? And that was because it cost $2 to propose to the DAO, and and someone wanted to, right? And so in this case scenario, if they do that, they delay us 8 hours and get our attention. So you can kind of think of the Tollgate fee divided by the proposal buffer as cost per hour of trolling, right? And so you want to have a high hourly rate to troll our DAO, because anyone can propose. You don't have to have tokens to propose. Anyone can propose. So even though we have a trusted seed of community holding tokens, because anyone can propose to the DAO, we have to keep our trolling rate high.
Would it be expected that most proposals will put another proposal to get this feedback, or are we just expecting that like all proposals will be like large coalitions or proposed by whales and other?
I mean, for the Hatch DAO, there is only one expected proposal. So the intention is to have one proposal that ever happens, and that is the commons upgrade proposal. And then we'll have conviction voting. And that's where real proposals for creating value for token engineering should arise. So the likelihood that we have lots of proposals is low. There might be, like I said, I didn't say agave, but there's side conversations with the One Hive crew about what if we used agave interest-bearing tokens instead of XDAI for money in the funding pool, right? Like that might be interesting, maybe there'd be a vote to first convert a percentage of the funds to an interest-bearing token and then put that in the funding pool or put that in the bonding curve. And of course we'd have to talk about that, but that could be a vote, right? There could also be a technical issue. And historically, One Hive has had this same setup where they had given refunds to people through conviction voting for creating proposals in Dandelion voting.
Cool. That helps that answer that for sure. Other question, non-redeemable funds, are those going to be rolled forward into the funding pool when there is a funding pool?
Well, that's up to the configuration space, like how we vote. But
Commons
really,
upgrade.
The DAO controls all of the money, right? So whether it's in the non-redeemable pool or the redeemable pool that people can rage quit out of, the DAO is making a decision to upgrade the commons, and it has these total amounts of funds. Yeah, they might be in the right pocket and some might be in the left pocket, but the DAO is going to spend the money however it wants. So it will decide how much goes here to the funding pool, how much goes to the bonding curve. And if the hatch tribute is 80%, then some of the money in the non-redeemable pool will likely go to the bonding curve, right? And if the hatch tribute is 1%, then some of the money from the redeemable pool will likely go to the funding pool. And the code is aware of this when it upgrades between the two pools, so either pool can give more to the second pool.
Cool. All right, I think that answers my big questions about parameters. So I've read through a couple of these, the Goldilocks, the crystal ball. I think I'm ready to comment on a couple. And I'm still planning on dropping the TEC forum post about impact hours distribution, although I definitely understand this is a convoluted issue because everyone had kind of a different scenario going into it. So it's not as simple as saying like, hey, look, here's the distribution. Some people were receiving side pay, some people have other jobs, some people were dedicated solely to this. So it's going to be a definitely, difficult way to, I don't think there will be one way to say, hey, this is fair, it's like, but I think that's still one of the big things that came up to me in the process in terms of how decision-making weight is distributed across impact, or how praise turns out into impact hour distributions and C-stack distributions. And I'm really interested in kind of the data analysis and how we can ensure that matches, what we were expecting to happen when we entered the process. I think, kind of doing.
I want to make some comments. I'm going to have to go in a minute, but I want to make some comments about idea of fairness, just because, to Jeff's point, like, it's fuzzy. The first is that fairness is inherently intersubjective, and so up to a point we have to kind of figure out with this community what feels fair, in the sense that we don't know exactly, since there's no clear reductive this this is fair complexity of a situation. The second is that what you're actually judging fair isn't the specific outcome, it's the process through which the outcome was derived. And so we're trying to find, let's say, fairer processes to create something that iterates in the direction of people, are empowered to continue to shift the process towards something that feels fairer, even if the notion of fair is not, there's no optimal objective or optimal algorithm that says, aha, this is the definition of fairness. In fact, one would argue that, any attempt to define fair in a final, this is the metric, would result in that metric immediately becoming gameable in such a way that it loses its usefulness as a metric of fairness. So with that in mind, I think there are really two ways that I want to encourage people to think about continuously making this fair, is asking themselves, what fairness means to them, meaning what way of measuring or feeling fairness is relevant, and make sure they express that. And the other is to, when it comes to making decisions, orient the fairness question around the processes rather than around the outcomes, because for every specific outcome, there's going to be people who may feel like they could have gotten more, or someone could have gotten less, or whatever, and that's inevitable. But the levers are at the process. So how do we make the process fair in the future, not like, was this specific outcome or that outcome fair? And that emphasis is including now where we have projections and estimates and dashboards to help people see what's going to happen. We're like, look, if this doesn't seem like the outcomes feel fair, then change the process so that we get to a process that we can feel is fair. And furthermore, it's not hard in stone, and the same processes can get evolved in the future towards sort of think of it like perpetually falling towards more fair, regardless of any particular outcome. The direction of the derivative should be fairer. And I know that's a weird and maybe mathy way to express it, but it's a lot more realistic than trying to achieve fairness. You need to be always moving towards fairer in practice. And insofar as you can contribute to that by participating, feeling, and communicating and discussing, that's what I think we need to be doing.
Yeah, and there's definitely a safety relief valve on the praise process, because the praise process is not fair. I think it's very geared towards extroversion. Like, this is just the natural state of affairs. What is cool is that it is open and participatory. Like, anyone can dish praise for the most part. It's very low barrier to entry. So but it's not a fair process. It really goes towards the people who are extroverted, whose name goes out there. This is why I'm so excited to see praise, which does a good job at quantifying care work or acknowledging soft work, to see that teamed with source cred, which is what the TEC is moving towards, because I believe the two processes really fill each other's gaps. The other thing is that the current impact hour is a predicted amount. So you'll see this is the predict. We did some predictions, and we also just basically used the amount of impact hours that people got in the recent history, and then scaled that to our projected date of launch. And because here's Optimus has 600, but if you notice the dashboard, he's got 700, because we're predicting he'll get another 100 in the next 3 impact hour amounts. And the other thing about the fairness and the praise process is that there is this other variable called the membership ratio, which in many ways actually acts as a second tribute, which is kind of interesting, where if you were not praised by the common stack and you didn't receive extra C stack, well, the membership rate, and then you want to participate, then the membership ratio above your participation level that's merited by by praise and by the dues you paid, the initial dues that you paid, which could be for free by scholarship. To go over that, you have to kind of prove your altruism at a specific rate, and that rate is determined by the membership ratio. So here's the formula. It's a relatively simple formula, because the dues are creating C-stack at a rate of 2.5. So you send 1 die in for dues, you get 2.5 C-stack, a C-stack score increase of 2.5. So now if the membership ratio is 8, and you want to put in an extra $1,000 than what your membership score allows, then you have to send $50 in dues to the common stack and the trusted seed. And if the ratio is 5, then it would be $80. If the ratio is 30, then it'd be $1.3, or sorry, it'd be $13 to put in an extra 1,000. So it's kind of an interesting second order tribute.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with this one. I think maybe another thing that probably merits its own sort of conversation, and I know that there have been some, and but for the people who are even maybe just getting involved now, highlighting again is sort of drawing a clear distinction between the role of the token engineering commons and the common stack and trusted seed, right? There's a relationship between the entities, and in part that's sort of necessary because it's bootstrapping to do all of this sort of vetting of people in terms of their motivations and levels of experience, and then ultimately though, being a separate organization and having different decision surfaces and different meanings of membership is something that I think needs to be clear and obvious to people who are participating in either system, actually. I think the point I'm trying to make is that, look, the Common Stack did a ton of work. It also provides a vetted group, basically whitelist. It does a lot of things, but one of them is just like build tools and enable and facilitate. And so ultimately the TEC is making its own decisions, one of which is related to how it pays it back or pays it forward, if you will. Like, I guess some of these things are pay it forward things. Some of these things are sort of, pay it back type things, but ultimately it's in the decision space of the TEC to choose to sort of thank in this way. So like the point is, it's a different organization. Even providing a mechanism through which that happens isn't the same as saying someone has to use it.
Well, it's not only thanking the trusted seed, but also creating a barrier of entry to people who are not engaged but want to participate. If they want to participate, they have to pay this tax. And we could, of course, just have that money be burned.
Sure.
But instead, it's going to this. So it's it's an interesting variable, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm not making a value judgment on it so much as I'm trying to like clarify, and even for myself, like what is it? And it sounds like it has a couple properties. One is a friction that can help affect the incentives, but the other is a sort of, it's relational to another organization as a form of attribution and or sort of thanks. It's not a required payment. It's a option for sort of paying back an effort, right? It's sort of the negative of a SaaS fee. Like SaaS fees you have to pay, and sort of a membership fee like this one says, hey, we chose to use this thing and we are going to sort of opt to compensate backwards for it, but it's not a required thing. It's part of the decision of the people who are, providing that. Does that make sense? Like it's backwards of a fee. It's not a fee. You don't have to do it. It's under the control of the payer, not under the control of the payee.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a scholarship, but it's a really important variable. Like, and there's a lot of interesting dynamics because there's also the scholarship, right? You can get an entrusted seed for free. You just have to apply for a scholarship. But if you set it to 5 and you apply for free, then you can only send 5,625 wrapped X die to the hash. But if you set this to 50, then you can send 50,000, without paying anything to the trusted seed. So it's just, it's a wild thing. But then this also creates a cap, right? A second max cap score. But anyway, Zargham, we can let you go.
I gotta run, and I'll be honest with you. Like, I think this is the part that I have the least familiarity with, and like at the intuitive level, I like the idea of creating, thankful backflows as ways of building relationships and maintaining relationships between organizations. But I also am hyper cognizant of not locking people in or forcing rents and, trying to figure out the right way to manage those relationships without saying, you should never have to pay anyone or anything versus, hey, look, we benefited from this thing and we have the choice to, further it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's a decision the TEC has to make.
Right. Cool. I got to run. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.